Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of By the Way to Purposeful Procurement. My name is Philip Ideson, and I'm the Managing Director at Art of Procurement. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Rich Ham. Rich is the CEO and founder of Fine Tune. Rich, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here, Phil. It's lonely in the studio today. I'm
Hi.
I'm used to having you at my left here, but Phil's remoting in from Boston today.
Y-
People, nice to see
Yeah,
you.
I was going to say, for anybody who's on watching the video, you do look lonely in that studio, but
Yeah,
hopefully we can keep you company,
I've got friends on the other side of the
remote.
glass here, the peanut gallery.
Well, today we're joined by David Loseby. David is someone that my team has worked with for a number of years and has spent time in both the business and procurement world. He's been a chief procurement officer, and in the academic worlds. Gives him a really unique perspective on the topics that we've covered in this series so far. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, and good to be on the podcast.
Yeah, it's we want to talk a little bit today about kind of behavioral impact of procurement incentives. But before we start, we always kind of just have some questions, get to know you a little bit more. You introduce yourself as a pracademic. Could you talk about what that means?
Yeah, it's it's I suppose it's one of those people that sits in between being a practitioner and an academic. So it's a bit like having a foot in both camps. And for those that understand a little bit of science, I'm a bit like the osmotic layer between two liquid states, if you like, one being business and one being academia.
Mhm.
So I guess I speak two different languages, one of which is academia and one of which is more business and practice. So I guess I'm the interloper between those two different worlds.
Well, hopefully, you can help us bridge some gaps today between those two worlds. I think that the academic part of your experience have had a lot of opportunities to think and write about the theories behind so much of what we see in practice in the business world. Could you just share kind of a little bit more about the day to day of your work?
Yeah, I suppose it's the classic sort of ball juggling of a portfolio, but in essence, I work as a professor of research impact in supply chain management at Leeds University Business School, which is a global top 100 university. Um, so my focus of my research, in fact, interestingly, I'm curating a couple of papers actually at the moment as we speak on the behavioral aspects associated with digital transformation in procurement.
Mm.
Um, on the flip side of that, then I work as an editor in chief for two academic journals. One being the Journal of Public Procurement, which covers
Yeah.
all the things associated with public administration and public procurement across the globe, and then a new open access journal called the Journal of Responsible Production and Consumption, which is all around SDG 12. And then in between times, I write my own research papers, white papers, and guess what? I do some consulting work as well. So the day is never dull.
It sounds like it. So the consulting work helps you stay current, I suppose. I've always found an importance of kind of when you step away from day-to-day practitioner work, finding ways to stay involved so that you kind of can continue to empathize with the realities on the ground, as opposed to it's easy. I find it for myself, as I stepped away from practitioner, easier to think or it's easier to forget about the day-to-day realities of what so many people in the procurement and supply chain world face.
Absolutely, and I think that's essential, and it's one of the things that I guess being in the position that I'm in helps me to translate the academic work, but also vice versa. So, um, as you say, I mean, having your finger, as I call it, on the pulse of what's happening in business, and particularly as we recognise the polycrisis that we're in, um, the day-to-day demands and the pressures on businesses. I mean, I was talking to another CPO this morning, funny enough, and they're now sort of literally a few days ago they've announced a demerger. They've announced sort of different plans about what they're going to do with the business. But this is a global business, and there are people in lots of different locations. But the pressure of the day to day, we're never ever going to get away from cost savings, cash flow
Yeah.
improvement, working capital
Mhm.
improvements, all those kind of things. But the real sort of, how can I put it? um, essence of, and then getting to the value piece, which is about all those other attributes in terms of stakeholders, the supply chain, innovation, keeping customers really happy, all that kind of stuff. And then being able to measure it and communicate that is a really tough balancing act. So I have every sympathy with every single CPO and indeed procurement professional out there, because the task is getting tougher and harder by the day, and the skills, I'll call it the skills required to do it, are just expanding as well by the day. So it's by no means an easy task.
David, I'm
And Rich, I
interested
know
in your. Oh, I'm sorry, Phil. I stepped on your toes there. Go
no,
ahead, Phil.
no, I was gonna. We may have a little bit of this being in 2 different locations, but I was actually gonna naturally hand over to you. So please go ahead.
David, I'm interested in your work editing the Journal of Responsible Production and Consumption, specifically, through the lens of procurement. How does, how do you view the connection of responsibility and procurement, or what does responsible procurement mean to you?
It's a good question, and the answer that I always give is that it's quite a simple one, which is it depends upon the situation, the context, and the people involved, because the reality is it will have different meanings and significance to different people. And I think that's one of the things where, looking at it as a behavioral scientist as I do, the recognition that not everybody views and sees the world in exactly the same way, not everybody communicates in exactly the same way. I think it's about that sort of getting to that empathy and that understanding as to what the other party or parties are seeking to achieve, their level of appetite in terms of either be it risk or whatever it happens to be, but also their propensity to engage in sustainability initiatives, the extent to which they're driven hard by shareholders in terms of just pure cost out. I think you have to understand and listen to all of those different signals, if you like, and then decide what is the most appropriate approach that will get engagement, people will take accountability for and take ownership for. And so therefore we can't prescribe a one size fits all in this space, and therefore it is about working within parameters and guidelines and all those wonderful things that we have. But I think it's also about being pragmatic as well as empathetic with all those involved in what responsible procurement means. And it does mean different things in different places. So, let's call it out. Let's not pretend that it's some utopian state that every single individual and organization and person on the planet can achieve, because it's not the same. And I think that sort of that broad spectrum of how can I put it, recognition of what responsible procurement is something to be embraced and then developed on and worked with. And so I think it's in the interest, if you like, of all parties to engage effectively and listen very actively as to how we can make this work for everybody, and recognizing that will be at different levels and different start points for lots and lots of different parties. That's why I'm giving you a bit of a fudge answer really in a way, because I don't think there is a how can I put it, an identifier or a marker where you could say, how can I put it, this is the benchmark metric, because it doesn't exist.
This, I think the answer does connect, and of course the correct and true answer is often complex and complicated, and most complex problems can't be solved with 3 or 4 words that fit on a bumper sticker. And so, that makes all the sense in the world. But I think your answer does connect in large part to our project, in that, we're envisioning and trying to build towards, publication of a set of imperatives that would promote a more purposeful future state for procurement. And of course, irresponsible procurement would be the opposite of purposeful, and responsibility and purposeful and purpose kind of go hand in hand. And so I want to pivot just slightly here and ask you, when you first heard about our project, and I think I was the one that described it to you, and the thesis behind it, that there were these certain systemic flaws in the ways that corporate procurement departments and the people within them tend to be incentivized, and that these flaws were doing surprisingly significant damage with respect to purposeful procurement, that they were standing in the way of optimally purposeful procurement. What was your reaction?
I think my reaction is a combination of I'm not surprised to we need to do better, and what I mean by that is that, to your point, I mean I've engaged with lots and lots of people over many years, and yes, we all get tasked and targeted with the classic, I'll call it, traditional metrics. However, I think this is where the responsible procurement bit then starts to come in, which is, and I'll give an example to try and illustrate it, because I think that's quite important, which is, I don't know, take something simple like packaging, and we then say, right, okay, then so I can use virgin material for my packaging, or actually I can say, no, I want X percentage of reclaimed materials. I want to go through an exercise that says, let me understand how I can be more frugal about the amount of packaging that I use. Let me think about different ways in which I can actually solve the whole concept of packaging. Packaging is there to protect, if you like, the original product. So what other ways can I do that? And I think this is where the responsibility then comes back to procurement to say, no, it's not just about taking another 2% out of the cost price of, whatever it happens to be, but actually it's about going back to that critical thinking skill, which is, what is it I'm trying to deliver here? What's the purpose of what I'm going through, and what am I being asked to do? And what's the best way in which I can, if you like, deliver a solution that is more responsible than the solution that we currently have? And that is about stepping back and really sort of thinking about this as a, how can I put it, in a very different way, a different context. A bit like, if you've never seen packaging before, you might ask what I call all the sort of the toddler questions, which is, so what's this packaging stuff? What's it doing? What's its purpose? Why is it there? Why do we need to have so much? Why can't we, so it's almost like the irritating questions that critical thinking asks us to sort of, if you like, challenge ourselves by. And I think that's where the responsibility of procurement should sit. And I think that's a very different role to just simply trying to sort of squeeze another couple of more pips out of the lemon, because that's what we've got. And I think that's quite binary, it's quite transactional. And that's why, for me, taking a more purposeful approach to procurement is so critical, because we can make such a massive difference, but it does require different critical thinking skills, along with many others, that change the way in which we approach it.
Yeah, I think you just hit on one of the flaws that we've talked so much about, which is that the driving, primary, by far and away the most commonplace key performance metric for procurement is so narrow. Not only is it, the term that I'm sure we're going to make an argument for banishing, savings, but even the way savings tends to be defined is so distorted and narrow that the procurement professional simply isn't generally asked, except in more progressive, forward-thinking cultures, generally isn't asked to do the sorts of things you're arguing for there. That really the squeezing a couple of pips out of the lemon is actually all they're asked to do, because they say, well, this is the incentive plan I've been handed, and I make my numbers if I accomplish X, but those other things don't help me make my numbers, and so why would I pursue them? And you're left only you're left to ask people to kind of behave, and now we're turning the page to behavior a little bit in a way that's contrary to their own interests. And so, with that as a backdrop, I wonder, are there certain general principles or truths about incentive structures and behavior, and where these things intersect with procurement, that you think we should be mindful of as we start to envision a more forward-thinking future state, a healthier plan that we would put forth?
Absolutely. So if you think about it from a, how can I put it, a corporate level, and we said, actually, what's the driver here? Well, it's actually the profitability of the organization or the enterprise. Um, so I'll give an example to illustrate that. I was in a business whereby the CEO came along to me and said, "Oh, I've just made this commitment to the stock market, and they really, really liked it. I made a commitment to be, to have an efficiency drive." He said, "But I haven't got a clue what we're going to do. Have you got any ideas?" So I said, "Well, give me 24, 48 hours, and I'll come up with a few." Um, and I thought, well, one of the things that you know we we could do is we actually were just about to do this, and I stopped it actually, and I explained why in a moment, which was just to go out and retender our energy. And I said, no, 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 this is not about retendering our energy. This is about how much energy we consume and how we can do things differently. And somebody said, well, what do you mean by that? So I said, well, if you think about the fact we've got properties and facilities and et cetera, in around 30 different countries, and what we're really should be doing is thinking about the ways in which we can consume less, because the one thing that's within our gift or our control will be, the consumption level. We're at the mercy in some ways of the market in terms of what happens to the energy price. I said, but so if we look at it from the point of view of saying, if we can consume less energy, and I gave him a list of 10 items. I said, there's a bunch of things here we can just do and it will cost us nothing. There's a bunch of other things here that actually we can put some small investment in, like little sensors and things like that on lighting and all sorts of wonderful stuff, which will cost us, some money, but actually the payback is between 3 and I think 7 months, I think it was the number. I said, but after that, then we're then into, a return, if you like, in a sense, on that investment. And I said, that's all within the gift of the country MDs. Excuse me. So I said, I'm going to go out with a plan that says, here you go, here's the 10-point plan. We can do this, and this will improve your P&L. How do you feel about it? And they all went, yeah, love it. So we gamified it, and then we set up a league table for all the different countries, and everybody engaged in it. And all they had to do was send us a copy, a little photograph of their meter readings. Sounds really simple, but that was the whole idea. And as a consequence of just changing that behavior and engaging with the business on the basis saying, actually, we're here to actually improve your P&L. Obviously, we could then aggregate all the buying of the energy, and we could predict different levels of energy consumption. But what it meant was that there was an engagement then from the business. It spoke their language in terms of, this is about helping you with your profit and loss account. What's not to like about it? So it was exactly that sort of change of approach. And therefore, when we talk about simplistic metrics of cost savings, and we've got to track them throughout the year, and what was the bill and all the rest of it. Actually, if you change the metric to say it's about the profit and loss of the entity or the organization or the enterprise through the things that we do, maybe that would be a very different metric, because that then means that you've then absolutely got to get engagement, adoption, and ownership of the things that you do and put in place. And that's a very different approach altogether, I believe, anyway.
That engagement, did it help having that the CEO had made a commitment to Wall Street, and therefore there was a common cause? Or because it's funny, when you were saying that, I was kind of smiling to myself, because I was in a situation as well earlier in my career where commitments were given even around specific categories that were then, okay, how do we do this? And the answer was, well, actually, you can't, for a bunch of circumstances. So then everybody's scrambling around trying to find alternatives. Does it need that top-down support, or is there a way to, if you don't necessarily have that CEO level support, to still kind of take this approach to building relationships with stakeholders that can replicate that kind of all in it together? I think camaraderie that was part of meeting this goal.
There's a duality to that in the simple fact of getting the sponsorship from the CEO is hugely important, and in fact actually accelerates anything that you're going to do, because it's a bit like saying the guy who sits in the top seat basically says, this is what we're going to do, and I'm backing this guy to go do it, which is brilliant because it means you can move over the ground at speed. But I think also we should be very cognizant of the fact then that we don't, I'll call it, arrogantly abuse that, because you come back a second time and you've abused that sort of, how can I put it, I'll call it entry ticket, as it were, in a sense, to exert a change on the organization. I think you've still got to do it in a way that still engages then the people who are impacted by this. And so the second part of my answer would be more about, if you don't get the CEO's sponsorship or the CFO sponsorship or whatever else, you still need to get that engagement with the business, because having a great contract that nobody buys into is tantamount to just a waste of paper. So I think you have to then make sure then you've got that engagement and you've got people taking ownership for what you're going to do. And as I've said to many people on many occasions, you could get a 40% saving plan and everybody goes, fantastic. But if nobody buys into it and nobody's prepared to engage on it, then it's 40% and nothing. However, if you've got a plan that said you can have 20% and everybody buys into it, and everybody sort of adopts it and pursues it, vigorously, then that's the plan that you want. And furthermore, as well as I do, that people will then go, that worked really well. Can we now come and talk to you about something else where you've never had access to an area in the business or a piece of work you've never been able to get to before, because everybody considered it was, how can I put it, beyond the remit of procurement because it was too delicate and too complex or whatever. And I think this is where you then start to build that trust in an organization, and you start to then get that level of engagement, the level of commitment, and you do start to sort of have a very different set of mindset and culture in the business that says procurement are there, they're the good guys. They're not the procurement police. Actually, they're there to sort of help us. They're a supportive function, and they're very much understanding of our goals and objectives, very much understanding of our P&L, etc. And I think that's the way you have to look at it. You can't look at it from the point of view of saying, back to what I said earlier, which is just squeezing another couple of pips out of the lemon and going, well, great job I've done. And there you go, off you go and pick up the pieces. You can't behave in that way, because it's not sustainable.
By the way, listeners, if you had the over or under 2.5 references to pips in this particular episode of By the Way, you are a winner. We have 3 references to pips, and I'm fighting really hard to resist a Gladys Knight reference in this context here, but we'll keep it on the rails. David, you have spoken and written extensively about behavioral architecture, and I would very much like to explore this concept as we consider this, as we compile this new plan. And first of all, I guess for our listeners, what do you mean when you speak of behavioral architecture? What is it? And then furthermore, how should it be considered as we construct a forward-looking plan for corporate procurement?
Okay, so there's different ways of explaining this, and I'll try and keep it as simple as possible, but I have to sort of go back to the sort of the I'll call it the foundational pieces, which is each and every person has 200 plus cognitive biases, and they're measured on a scale of 1 to 5. Each and every single one of us have what we call the big 5 personality traits, and again, they're measured on a scale of 1 to 5. And each and every one of us has what we call our heuristics, which is our experiences, both socially and in business. And of course, you put all those things together, and what it then makes you recognize is that because we've got all these different sort of, how can I put it, attributes and biases, and they're all acting in different ways, that what you recognize is that no 2 people, groups, or sets of communication will ever be the same. And so what you focus on then is to say, let me understand the if you like, in a sense, the variables that I'm working with in this particular group or situation or whatever it happens to be. And that's part and parcel of then doing the initial analysis and understanding of, if you like, the people components that you're working with. You then begin to sort of start to say, well, what is it that I'm trying to do in terms of where's my start point? Where do I ideally want to get to? And more importantly, what will motivate the individuals to do something different, or how can I put a different approach, or a different decision-making approach, or whatever it happens to be. And you start to work through what we call a whole series of architecture that says, for instance, a simple example would be having one slide deck and presenting exactly the same slide deck for every single person you met. And I did make that mistake earlier on in my career, and I paid the price for that. You have to then start to customize it and tailor it to each and every single individual or group or whatever it happens to be, recognizing the way in which they then interpret and understand what information is that you're presenting to them. Excuse me, sorry. So I think that the architecture, in a sense, is about taking an approach that is tailored. So the whole essence of architecture is about saying, this is not sort of I think the American expression is a cookie cutter approach to everything. It's about saying we need to take an approach that's customized to each and every single situation and set of people. And that's the architecture. You are the architect around how people engage, understand, communicate, discern information, make decisions, all those kind of things. And it's all about that understanding. And there are lots of other wonderful things in there that I can talk about in terms of cognitive framing and all sorts of other things in terms of cognitive biases, where you then begin to go, aha, yeah, I've seen that, I recognize that, but I didn't realize what it was called.
So what does that, how do we think about applying kind of those principles to how we align and incent procurement teams to the changing and the differentiating needs of each one of their stakeholder groups, rather than taking a cookie cutter approach, which is the you're all responsible for saving X amount of money, for example. And it's just kind of one KPI, and we all kind of go off and say, okay, by hook or by crook, I'm going to save you some money, and I don't care if that's what you want or not. So how can we kind of think about that as we start to build incentive structures within the procurement world?
And I think this goes back to sort of the whole architecture piece. If we start to think about the fact that, I'll give you some examples from my own personal experience, which is, it was very pronounced in one business whereby, I'm going to make it really simplistic, albeit it's not quite that simplistic, but I'm going to try and make it simplistic for illustrative purposes, which is, the CFO said, just give me a spreadsheet. And the marketing said, just draw me a picture type of thing. And the CEO says, you've got 30 seconds to tell me what we need to do and what decision needs to be made. And so what that does then is, it means then that you've then got to, once you've got an overall plan that's got all these different, if you like, it's a bit like a toolbox. They've got all these elements and attributes associated with it, but there's no point giving everybody the whole damn toolbox, because that's not what they want. They're short of time. They want to connect with the agenda that they're on, the objectives that they've got. And so it's important then that you become quite selective about what you then choose to present to different audiences. It doesn't mean to say you're being disingenuous. You're simply being efficient in terms of the information that you present to them. Excuse me, sorry. So what you're doing is, you're architecting an approach. And again, another recent example where somebody said, the CEO and CFO are not interested in sustainability, but the sustainability director is saying, yeah, but I've got targets. I've got to save X hundred tons of carbon this year. And I said, don't worry. I said, we can develop something that does that. So I said, what the business has said is that they want to think about cost efficiency and optimization. It's what I call the CEO agenda. So I said, we can talk about it in those sorts of terms, but we just stay silent about the fact we're going to save 300 tons of carbon this year, or 300 metric tons of carbon. And they said, oh, right. Okay. So I said, but we've architected an approach that will deliver us all of those things, and also it will improve our customer satisfaction scores because we can do this now. And that will keep, marketing and sales happy. And I said, but you don't need to expressly talk about these things, but we talk about the things that people want to hear about. It's a bit like sort of saying to somebody, you've got a program agenda for the evening, but I'm only interested in the news and the documentary pieces. I'm not interested in sort of the sports bit because I'm not interested in sport. So you don't tell them about that bit. So it's part of the program, but you just don't tell them about it because they're not interested. And actually, they would disengage, more importantly, if you did start to talk about sport, because they go, well, this is not relevant. So they'll walk away. So I think it's about this whole approach and the way in which we engage, if you like, on a very considered basis. The facts still remain there. They're all transparent, but it just means that the way in which you present them, it's a bit like an a la carte menu, if you will. You're presenting the things that somebody's really interested in, rather than going, I'm going to talk to you about this beefsteak. And you go, yeah, but I'm a vegetarian. I'm not interested. Why are you talking to me about, where the beef comes from? I don't give a monkeys. All I'm interested in is what the vegetarian dishes are. So it's about that selective way in which you engage and approach the whole situation.
Yeah. So, I would, for example, tell folks who are working with marketing from a procurement perspective, focus on what you're doing and the savings will follow. But the moment that you talk to marketing about savings, they will stop wanting to work with you. So like kind of talking as much of a relational, as we go back to the behavioral approach to how you're engaging with people and talking about, what you're trying to achieve for them, while architecting behind the scenes a way that's going to meet everybody's objectives.
And
Correct.
Phil, I'd be
cognitive framing. Sorry.
No, quite all right, David. I think you'll have thoughts on this, but we talk often about how procurement practitioners don't tend to be the best marketers, and yet, if we were to create better connective tissue between procurement and the other wings of the business, ranging from marketing to operations to accounting and finance, to all, because I really think, Thomas Ideson said it a few episodes back, Phil. He said, we've really created this driving metric that exists totally divorced and separate from the rest of the business. And it's caused there to be a lack of connective tissue between procurement and the rest of the business. But if there were better connective tissue, I would think that over time, this wouldn't happen overnight, but I would think over time procurement would become better at the marketing aspects of procurement because they would be connected as teammates to a better extent than they are today. And when you are a teammate with somebody, you learn what matters to them better. You learn to speak their language better. You learn to communicate with them better. I think if we could promote better connective tissue over time, procurement would find itself learning how to market its role better. Does that pass your smell test, David?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things I rightfully smile about is the fact that you look at any procurement course from a base level to a master's level, and you say, now point to me which bits of this have got marketing, communications, and behavioral science in, and you go, oh, hang on a minute, there's less than 1% in there. When in fact, actually, it needs to be a much more balanced program to address exactly the point that you've made, Rich. So, I think we're sort of not setting ourselves up for success because we're not emphasizing those skills, and we're not emphasizing the shifting, what the role needs to be, and how people need to operate and behave effectively.
Yeah. David, before I hand it to Phil to bring us home here, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. It's been a really a fascinating conversation that's brought a unique perspective, and one that really, for the first time, I think, we've talked a little bit about natural human behavior as in the respect that humans will tend to pursue their own selfish interests, and aligning the money with desired business outcomes is, of course, smart, but there's more to behavior than just that, and I think you've really brought some interesting concepts and thoughts for us to think about as we forge ahead. Phil, if you would, bring us home, but thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I just had one last question. If you could just kind of give us maybe a couple of tips about how we can think around how we incent procurement teams, how we measure procurement teams, kind of taking into account everything we've talked about today and recognizing that, as part of this project, what we're trying to look at is like, how do we create more of a balanced scorecard that relies on more than just savings alone? And just from your experiences, kind of any tips you might be able to share with us before we close out the conversation.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, I think getting procurement to, how can I put it, equally own the objectives, the metrics, the outcomes of other areas of the business. So be that marketing, which might be about, improving the CSAT score. It might be about sort of, market penetration or whatever it happens to be. But it gets people then thinking very differently and going, actually, if I dumb all this down and rip a lot of cost out, then all those scores are just going to go south, basically. So that's the wrong thing to do. So I think it's about engaging in a more collaborative fashion, but also then brokering this sort of collective ownership of a wider set of metrics that aren't all just talking about cost savings and all the stuff that we know and love, shall we say. So I do think it's about galvanizing the collective of the organization, but also, even if it's saying, right, okay, these are the top 3 things that are important to sales, these are important to marketing, these are important to engineering, operations, whatever it happens to be, and going, well, actually, I'm going to make a percentage of that part and parcel of your collective bonus plan. So you have some, if you like, a bit of skin in the game in terms of, if they don't improve, then your bonus doesn't improve either. So it's not all about just rip some cost savings out and then there's no consequence. I think it's about absolutely having that collective ownership and collaboration across the organization. So it is about that mutual gain share, if you want, across the business.
Absolutely.
I love that. So, working with you kind of you're requiring a procurement team member to set a series of shared metrics with their stakeholder, which will include yours, of course, but it's a shared metrics. And then you kind of go into those stakeholders at the end of the year and asking, did they achieve those metrics? And part of your approval or bonus structure or incentive plan is based on the achievement of those. David, I know it's time to wrap up. We've taken a lot of your time already today, so I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And of course, Rich as well for joining me. And kind of, we've been going backwards and forwards here, being in the studio and not in the studio. So we didn't talk over each other too many times today.
No, it's been great. David, thank you so much. What a good conversation. And we'll be reflecting on it in the next episode or two in a fill-ins episode where we can kind of digest some of the things David said and weave them into our plans going forward. So this was super helpful. Thanks so much.